Psachim per Gimel Mishnah Aleph. Ilu Evrim b'Pesach, these substances must be removed on Pesach since they're not allowed to be in one's possession. The discussion in this parak is going to be about the halachas of being mevar chametz, to be mekayim the mitzvah of tashbisu, with two different categories of chametz: taruvus and chametz nuksha. Taruvus chametz means a mixture containing chametz, and chametz nuksha means chametz it's not fit to eat. Nuksha is the name given to any chametz that's not truly fit to be eaten, but it's not completely inedible. So elu evrim b'Pesach, these substances must be removed on Pesach, since they're not allowed to be in a person's possession. Kutach habavli. Kutach is a dip made from sour milk and moldy breadcrumbs. Shecher hamodi, beer that was made in modai. Beer produced in the times of the Mishnah was commonly made from dates and therefore not chametz. The beer from modai, however, was made from barley, similar to the beer of today, and was chametz. V'chometz edoimi, and vinegar, which was made from barley that was made in edoim. Zaysaim hamitzri. Egyptian zaysaim is a drink made from barley, saffron, and salt. V'zoymon shel tzaboim. Now the Mishnah is going to list three cases of chametz nuksha, three things that are not edible. Zoymon shel tzaboim is bran water used by dyers, water in which wheat or barley bran was soaked and used in producing certain red dyes. V'amelon shel tabochim. A melon is a kind of bread made from young unripe grain, which a cook would place over the mouth of a pot to absorb the froth and bad smell. Koilon shel sofrim, and a scribe's glue, was a paste-like glue made from flour dust of millstones, used by scribes to bind together the paper scrolls. These three types of chametz are still somewhat edible and can be eaten b'shas chak in an emergency. And the Isser of chametz therefore applies to them. However, chametz is completely inedible, may be kept over Pesach. The Tanakama asers chametz nuksha, or taruvus chametz if it's edible, but he doesn't aser owning a mixture containing inedible chametz. I mean, if you have a taruvus chametz with chametz nuksha in it, then you're allowed to keep it. But Rebbe Lezer is chaylik. Rebbe Lezer omer aftach shitei nashim. Also forbidden are women's cosmetics that are made with chametz and used by women to remove facial hair. Although these cosmetics contain only chametz nuksha mixed together with other ingredients, Rebbe Lezer holds that one may not own them on Pesach. You would have to get rid of them as well. Zehaklal, this is the rule. Kol shumim and dogon harei over Pesach. One is over the isser of owning chametz on Pesach with anything made from a species of grain that has chametz in it. It doesn't matter what consistency it's about. The Tanakama, however, does not require the removal of these types of women's cosmetics from one's possession on Pesach, even though they do have grain inside. Harei elu ba'azhara ve'ein behem mishum kares. The Mishnah up to this point had discussed the isser of owning these substances on Pesach, but now it's going to discuss the isser of eating them. So these substances are forbidden to be eaten on Pesach midaraisa, ve'ein behem mishum kares, but there's no chiyuv of kares for eating them. Eating chametz on Pesach is punishable by kares. However, the pasuk refers only to eating pure chametz, not taruvus or chametz nuksha. The isser to eat chametz in a mixture, or chametz that's not really fit to eat, comes from a different pasuk called machmetzes le'seichelu. You may not eat any chametz products. The pasuk doesn't mention the punishment of kares, merely an isser, so it'd be allowed. Therefore, there's no kares attached to eating these substances. Only the usual einish of malchus that applies to most isuri deraisa. In the case of taruvus chametz and other items, he would receive malchus only if he ate enough of the mixture to have eaten the kezayis of the chametz itself, and he did so with klei achilas pras. Mishnah Beis. Botzek shebesidke areva. The dough that's found in the cracks of a kneading bowl, which is left in place to seal the cracks, the halacha is as follows. Im yesh kezayis b'makom echad, if there's the size of a kezayis of dough in one place, chayiv levar, the owner is mechuyev to get rid of it since it's not considered to be part of the bowl. But if there's no shear kezayis in one place, batal b'miyutay, it's batal due to the small shear. The dough is considered to be part of the bowl, and it's not food. Therefore, it doesn't need to be removed and disposed of before Pesach. This is true if all the small pieces together create a kezayis. As long as each piece by itself is less than a kezayis and is being used to seal the cracks in this big bowl, it's considered part of the bowl. However, if the pieces of dough were not left there to seal the cracks of the bowl, even less than a kezayis must be removed. And we cannot view these pieces as being part of the utensil since they're not meant to remain there permanently. Okay, and similarly, in regard to the hilchas tumah, if a source of tumah touches the dough in the crack, but not the bowl itself on Pesach, the halacha is as follows. If that piece of dough is the size of an olive, is the shear of a kazayas, since it's not considered part of the bowl in regard to Hilchos Pesach, it's also not considered part of the bowl in regard to Hilchos Toma. Since the halachas of Pesach required that the dough be removed, it cannot be considered part of the bowl on Pesach. Therefore, it's considered a food which has become tameh in its own right. Therefore, the dough itself becomes tameh, but the bowl does not. Since food cannot transmit tumah to kalim, as we spoke in the first parak, and we'll be mentioning throughout the Mishnayos that this is a halacha. However, if the dough that was touched is less than the shear of a kazayis, it's considered part of the bowl, and therefore it's as if the source of tumah touched the bowl itself, and the entire bowl would be tameh. When the tumah touches part of the entire utensil becomes tameh. Therefore, if this little bit of dough is considered part of the bowl, the tumah that touches it makes the entire bowl tameh. However, even this small amount of dough is considered part of the bowl only if the owner plans to leave it here permanently. This is the halacha for the tumah of the kneading bowl in Pesach. During the rest of the year, the size of the dough is irrelevant. Rather, it depends on the kavanah of the owner. If he's particular about it, meaning he doesn't want to leave the dough in the crack and is planning to remove it, so the dough is not considered part of the bowl and therefore serves as a mechitza to the tumah. I mean, it's chaytzis b'fnei tumah. So the Rav is going to explain. It's chaytzis b'fnei tumah ben yesh be'kazayis ben ein be'kazayis lenach the tumah la'areva, and then therefore the bowl will not become tameh. If he's not makbid that the dough is there and he wants the dough to stay there, I feel yesh be'kama zaysim, even if it has a bunch of shiurim of zaysim over there, harehu ka'areva, it has the din of the bowl. But when the sheretz, the tumah, touches the dough, it's as if he touches the bowl itself, and it will make the bowl tameh. But if he wants it to remain there, the dough is considered to be part of the bowl. Therefore, when the tumah touches the dough, it makes the entire bowl become tameh. Batzek hacherish, silent dough. What do we mean by silent dough? So usually one can bang on the dough and hear a thump, which indicates that the dough has become chametz. The dough of this Mishnah has been left for some time, but doesn't produce any sound. Therefore, we're not sure whether it's actual chametz and just the abnormal kind of dough, or whether the dough is not yet chametz. So bazik hacherish with silent dough, the halacha is like this: if there exists a similar dough, another dough needed at the same time, and we can see that has become chametz, hareza aser. This bazik hacherish is also going to be aser, since we assume that this too has become chametz. The Rav brings another pshat, not batzek hacherish, but batzek hacheres. So kasha kecheres, it's hard like pottery, vein and nikrim hechmetz, and you can't tell if it became chametz or not. So hareza aser, either way the silent dough was aser, since we assume that this too had become chametz. Just want to mention what Rashi says over there on the Mishnah about batzek hacherish, because we always have in the Mishnah cherish of a katan. So we always assume that a cherish is somebody that's not a bardas. Rashi in Psachim, I believe it's Daf Mem Daled, I'll check it up right now, seems to say a little bit different. Batzek hacherish Daf Mem Vav. Batzek hacherish, like Rashi, she'ein nikar im hechmetz im lav. We don't know if it became chametz or not. Shemishunahu kecherish hazeh, sheyesh lo oznayim, ve'ein nikrim she'mei im lav. The ein adam omid al berurei ve'al daitei, that it's a person has ears, so it looks like he could hear, because we assume that if a person has ears, he's able to hear, but we don't know if he could communicate. We don't know if he's hearing what's going on or not, because a person cannot be omid al berurei, on his clarity, ve'al daitei, and on his knowledge. So it's just interesting, because with that cloud, we always learn that a cherish is the pshat that he doesn't have das. And Rashi says over here on Daf Mem Vav Psachim that it's because we can't be mevar, we can't figure out, we can't be oimid on whether this person has knowledge and can communicate and can express himself like a normal person or not. So this dough, it's unclear to us if it's chametz or not. Just like a cherish, it's unclear to us if he's a bar das or not. Now we do know from the Gemara in Brachis and in Gittin that even if they could communicate through sign language, as was customary in the times of the Gemara, they would, by the Sudas, they would, when they were eating and they would want to talk, they would motion with their hands. And the Gemara Gittin on the Ayin Aleph or so discusses the sugi of Cheresh by being able to give a get or not being able to give a get. So there the Gemara also talks about the ability to use sign language. So if they could communicate and we see that they are bardas, so then they're not obviously not considered a cheresh. I actually know a person who's al pi halacha is probably not a cheresh, but he says that he's big Talmid Chacham, and he says he's able to learn for hours and hours and hours on end because there's no distractions, because he never hears anything. So he's able to. He definitely has a clarity of mind. Now it may be more difficult for him to communicate and for us to understand what he's saying, but I'll upon him. That is the story of the cheresh. Mishnah Gimel. Ketan mafrishan challah b'tumah b'yantif. How do we separate challah from dough that's in a state of tumah on the yantif of Pesach? It can't be left as dough, since it will become chametz. It can't be baked, since you can only bake on yantif things that will be eaten that day. And challah that's tamei cannot be eaten even by a kohen, and it cannot be burnt because it's forbidden to burn truma and challah on yantif. How then should someone making a tamei dough on yantif deal with the chiv to separate challah from it? So it's going to be a three-way machlokes in the Mishnah. Rabbi Lezer says, the woman who's making the dough should not designate the portion of it as challah until it's baked. She should not separate challah from the dough. Rather, she should make the loaves of the dough, bake them into matzah, and then designate one of the matzahs as challah. Although challah should be separated from the dough, if it wasn't, it's separated from the baked product. Here, where there's no choice, Rabbi Lezer recommends baking it first and separating the challah afterwards. We did discuss a similar concept in Masechta Challah. Even though one may not bake a loaf of tamei dough that was designated as challah, one may bake all the loaves first, then designate the loaf of challah afterwards. The reason for that is, at the time they're baked, each loaf can technically be eaten, and since a person may separate a small piece from each loaf as challah, therefore there's no Isser on Yantif by baking all the loaves, even if ultimately one decides to separate a whole loaf as challah. That's what Rabbi Lezer holds. Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira says tatil b'tzoynein. She should separate the challah from the dough and put it into cold water to prevent it from becoming chametz. Cold water prevents the dough from becoming chametz, and Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira argues on Rabbi Lezer because in his opinion, the matzah that will eventually be designated as challah should not be baked, since it will not be eaten. So you can't bake something on Yantif that you are not going to be able to eat. Rabbi Yeshua, lo yizehu chametz shebuzharon lo bali rabal yamatzeh, ela mafrashto manachta ada erev v'mechmitza hechmitza. So Rabbi Yeshua says the third shita is that lo yizehu chametz shebuzharon lo bali yamatzeh. This piece of challah, even if it becomes chametz, does not fall under the category of chametz that we're warned about in the Torah of bali rabal yamatzeh. Ela mafrashto manachta ada erev v'mechmitza hechmitza. Rather, she separates it from the dough and leaves it until evening, and if it becomes chametz, it becomes chametz. It's of no concern since she doesn't own it. According to Rishua, these Yisurim Deraisa are violated only when one owns the chametz in his possession. Once a person designates dough as challah, it no longer belongs to him, but to the mishpachas hakahuna. It belongs to the kahanim. It also doesn't belong to any specific kain until it's given to them. Therefore, the kahanim too are not in violation of these Yisurim. Right, the Rav says that Akati lemotel yad kohen, and therefore one may separate dough for challah and leave it to become chametz. Rabbi Lezer did not give this solution because he considers the challah to be the property of the one who separated it until he gives it to the kohen, which is stam a big shmuz bechlal in matnas kahuna and even in my matnas haniyim. Matnas kahuna, there's something called makiri kahuna. These are the kahana that you were giving to for generations, but matnas haniyim, there's no such thing. Pashtus is no such thing as a shevet hanius, and as we mentioned a bunch of times before, that when it comes to demai, a person could be mafkir all his nechasim and become an ani. So there's no such thing as a shevet haniyim. A person could do whatever he wants, and it will never make him a kain. But a person could do something to enable him to make something demai, and make his stuff hefker to be able to eat the demai. Mishnah Daled. Ram Gamliel Oimer Shalish Noshim Loshes Ka'achas. What are we talking about over here? Generally, raw dough turns into chametz only when it's left alone, and not when it's being worked on, when it's being kneaded or shaped. The Mishnah discusses how this rule applies in a situation where several women bake matzahs together in Pesach using a small oven that could only hold one woman's batch of dough at a time. Three women may knead their own batches of dough at one time and bake them in one oven, one after the other. Although the second dough will be left alone while the first one is baked, and the third will be left while the first and second one is being baked, we're not concerned that they'll become chametz in that relatively short time. Chachamim say that none of the doughs may be left alone even for a moment. Rather, each one of the three women must be busy with her dough all the time, as follows. While one woman kneads her dough, another shapes her dough. A reches means to shape the dough into loaves. And va'achas oifa, and another one bakes her dough. That is, only one woman kneads at first. Once she finished kneading and has started shaping her dough into loaves, the next woman starts kneading. Once the first woman has finished shaping her dough and has started putting her loaves into the oven, the second one starts shaping, and the third one starts kneading, and so on. In this way, every batch of dough is worked on constantly until it's put in the oven. Gamliel and the Chacham agree that it takes 18 minutes for unattended dough to become chametz. The machlekes concerns the case where three women start kneading different doughs at the same time and then bake them one after the other. The Chachamim are concerned that a dough might be left for 18 minutes as it waits its turn for the oven, while Ram Gamliel considers it unlikely that a dough will be left for so long, right? But because that's Ram Gamliel says that shalish nashim loshes ka'achas, and they could bake the hainu that he's not concerned that it's going to take that long, and it will all be within 18 minutes. Now, for all those who've been to a matzah bakery, they know that the whole process is very quick, obviously under 18 minutes, but the amount of time it stays in the oven is about a minute, maybe less, or maybe a minute and a half. And we used to time it when we used to go. Rabbi Kiva says, not all women, not all wood, and not all ovens are alike. Some women work more slowly, some ovens take longer to become hot, and some wood takes longer to start burning. Each of these factors increases the time that the baking will take, which in turn increases the time that the unbaked dough will be left alone. Since there are many unpredictable factors in the baking process, we cannot tell how long the baking will take. Therefore, it's wrong to leave one dough unattended while another dough is being baked, as Ram Gamliel says is mutter, because the baking might take so long that the unattended dough will turn to chametz. Rather, each dough must be worked on all the time, kishitas hachachamim. That's very interesting. I'm wondering about what Rabbi Kiva is talking about. Now, Bisman Hazeh, in a matzah bakery, when they have it down to a science, they know exactly how long everything takes. So then the pashtus is that as long as there aren't too many people in the matzah bakery, they should be able to finish everything in a timely fashion. And you do know that, meaning obviously one matzah bakery is not going to be the same as the other matzah bakery, but in this matzah bakery alone, it would be very, once you get it down to a science, you'll know it takes, X amount of time to knead the dough, and takes X amount of time to roll the dough, and takes X amount of time to bring it from the table where they roll it to make the holes in it, and then from there to the oven, and then how long it stays in the oven. But it's interesting if it would make an afgamina in how matzah is processed bisman hazeh, because hagam, many matzah bakeries are very heimish in the sense that it's not machine matzah, so it's not that commercialized, but it's definitely much more commercialized than it was in the times of the Tanoim. Anyways, Zeh HaKlal, the Mishnah explains that what a woman should do if she sees that the dough in her hand is about to rise. What should she do? The halacha is tofach tiltosh b'tzainin. If it starts swelling up, she should moisten her hands with cold water and smear the water over the dough, because the coldness slows down the leavening process. I'll just say that for a bunch of years, I went to the matzah bakery with the Rishiva Varan Shechta Zechrein Levracha, and although he was old and he was shach many times, but his job, he would roll the dough. But while he was rolling the dough, he was always telling everybody to keep it moving, to play with the dough, to poke it, or to roll it, or to even just to throw it around a little bit, just that it should be constantly in motion. Mishnah Hey, Seir Yisaref Va'oichloi Potter. Mishnah discusses the halacha for dough that has already reached a certain point in the process of becoming chametz. So Seir Yisaref, dough that has started to rise must be burnt, but somebody who eats it on Pesach is not chayiv kares or malchus. However, Asur Seir, because you're supposed to get rid of it before Pesach, and the Mishnah will define exactly what it is. Seir is halachically equivalent to chametz nuksha. The Tan of our Mishnah disagrees with the Tan of Mishnah Aleph, who holds that such chametz is asur min haTorah, and one who eats it is chayiv malchus. Siduk Yisaref. However, cracked dough, which is a madrega of chimutz, even more than Seir, must be burnt, but chayiv kares. But one who eats it is punished with kares, because this is 100% regular chametz, and it's not like it's too early on in the process to be considered like it's chametz. Ezehu seyor. What's seyor and what's siduk? So the Mishnah will explain. Kikarnei chagavim. Dough that has developed cracks like the antennae of locusts, which are short cracks that do not cross over one another. The cracks are so short and few in number that they don't meet one another. Siduk, what is cracked though? Shenis arvu sdakav zebazeh, though that is so severely cracked that the cracks cross over from one another. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda, azezach Rabbi Yehuda, b'chachamim. The chachamim disagree, and the chachamim say zebazeh ha'oichle chayiv kares. In either case, whether the cracks cross over or not, whether it's gekarnei chagavim, whether it's siduk or whether it's seyor, it's cracked though, and this one who eats it is chayiv kares. The chachamim hold that any dough that has some cracks on its surface is real chametz. So the ezu seyor. What is seyor for which there is no kares? Any dough whose surface has turned pale, like the face of a person whose hair stands on end because of a fright. According to the chachamim, as soon as the dough turns pale, even before it develops cracks, it's seyor which must be burnt. When cracks begin to show, it's absolute chametz 100%, and then you have to get rid of it for Pesach. Mishnah Vav. Arba Osir Shechali is b'Shabbos. On the 14th of Nisan, Erev Pesach falls out on Shabbos. Mevarim es hakol melufnei Shabbos. We have to dispose of all chametz before Shabbos. We have to destroy on Friday all chametz that we don't expect to eat on Shabbos. We may keep only enough for the Sudas Shabbos, so that we won't have to destroy any chametz on Shabbos. Since we usually destroy chametz by burning it, which is also on Shabbos, Remeir is concerned that if any chametz is left over after Shabbos meals, a person might forget to destroy it, and it'll end up being over on the Isur of Bali Rabbi Yimotzi. Divrei Remeir. V'chachamim emrim bizmanon. The chachamim say that we dispose of all chametz at its usual time in Erev Pesach, even though it's Shabbos. According to the chachamim, a person may keep as much chametz as he wants for Shabbos, because it will presumably be eaten, if not by him, by his family, and if not by his family, then by guests or by animals. You could consume it in a way that you won't run into having leftovers. The chachamim assume that the owner will find guests or animals to eat the extra chametz, while Rameir is concerned that he might not. It's just interesting that it comes to mind Rashi and Beya. Rashi, because many times people have difficulty trying to finish up all the chametz before the zman, if they don't want to burn it. But what's interesting is that Rashi says in Masechta Beya about Neshama Yisera that every Yid gets on Shabbos, that he has more room to eat more Meichel and Mashke. So he has more room to eat. So even if normally during the week he won't be able to eat so much, but because Erev Pesach Shechali is b'Shabbos, he might be able to eat more, to be mekayim the mitzvah of Tashbizu by eating it. According to the Chacham, a person may keep as much chametz as he wants. Fine. If one does have chametz left over, one must, of course, dispose of it in a manner that's motor on Shabbos. And the Mishnah Berurah and Siman Taf Mem Daled gives a whole list of different methods which a person can dispose of it on Shabbos. Rabbi Lezbar Tzaddik says Truma Melfnei Shabbos v'chulim bizmanan. This is going back to what we learned at the end of the first parak, that we dispose of chametz that's truma before Shabbos, and we dispose of ordinary non-kedushadik, meaning non-truma type of chametz at the usual time. Since truma is also to zorim and behemoths, if one leaves more than he needs for his Suda Shabbos, it will be hard for him to have it all eaten, and will likely have to destroy it on Shabbos. Therefore, one may not save more than necessary. In the case of ordinary chametz, however, any amount may be less for Shabbos, because as the Chachamim mentioned, as we mentioned the sheet of the Chachamim earlier, it may be eaten by guests or animals. Only Rabbi Lezbar Tzaddik differentiates between truma and non-truma. The Remeir and the Chachamim apply, the halach of Remeir and the Chachamim apply to truma and non-truma alike. Mishnah Zayin. We mentioned that the different ways of being mekayim in the mitzvah of bir chametz. So either by bedika, searching for the chametz and destroying it, or bittul, by speaking out that you're nullifying it. Minat Torah, either method is good enough, but the Chachamim require us to do both, as we mentioned in the Akdama to Parag Aleph. The Mishnah discusses the halacha of one who went on a journey before performing either mahalach of bir chametz, and so let's see what the Mishnah says. If one is traveling on the 14th of Nisan to shech its korban Pesach, or to circumcise his son, right? Because a person cannot eat from the korban Pesach unless he has a bris milah. Or to eat at a sudas erisin, a chasana, at the house of his father-in-law, erisin, which is the first step in the process of marriage. After erisin, the chasan and the kala are halachically married, but they may not live together until the second step, known as nisuin, till that part has been performed. In the times of the Mishnah, these two ceremonies were carried out sometime apart, usually a year, as per the Gemara at the beginning of Ksubis. Thus, the Erusin is celebrated with its own Suda. By mentioning the house of the father-in-law, the Mishnah implies that he's referring to the Chassan himself, right? So the Chassan is traveling on Erev Pesach, and he realizes he has some donuts from the previous night Shavuot Brachos, let's say. I mean, it's not Shavuot Brachos yet, because it's only Erusin, but he has some donuts in his pockets, let's say. And while he's on the road, he remembers that he has chametz in his house, and I guess he wouldn't have the donut in his pocket. So the halacha is like this: if he's able, meaning if he has enough time to return home to be mevar his chametz, and then go back to perform his mitzvah, he should indeed return home and destroy the chametz. Since destroying the chametz will not prevent him from performing the mitzvah, he should do both. But if he's not able to, meaning if he returns home and destroys the chametz, he'll not have time to do the mitzvah. So then he may be mevatel the chametz in his mind, and he doesn't have to go back to destroy it, and he may rely on the bittul, the alma, so that he won't lose the mitzvah of bir chametz. It's possible to be mevatel chametz up to the beginning of the 6th hour, as we saw in Perek Aleph, Mishnah Dalet. Our Mishnah must therefore be speaking of one who remembered before this deadline that he has chametz in his rishus. If he remembered later, when he can't be mevatel it anymore, the halachas are different from those mentioned in the Mishnah, and that would be the Mishnah Gimel of how to deal with what happens if you find chametz at a later stage. I mean, here he's probably not finding it, but he just knows that he has it in his rishus. Lahatzil min hanachrim, if one is on the way to rescue people from a dangerous group of goyim, umin hanohor, or from a flooding river, umin alistim, or from robbers, umin adleik, or from a fire, umin amapelas, or from a building that collapsed, and he remembers that he has chametz in his house, even if he does have enough time to return it and destroy the chametz, and then come back to rescue the endangered people, yivatel b'liboy, he should be mevatel the chametz in his mind, and he should not go back to destroy it. In these cases where he's involved in saving lives, he doesn't destroy his chametz, even if he can do so without the risk to his rescue mission. It's very interesting. What, I don't know the halacha l'maisa, but, this would sound like from the Parshas to the Mishnah, that somebody who has a hatala call, was taking hatala calls and wasn't able to be mevar chametz, then he would be able to be mevatel b'liboy. B'lishbais shvisas harishus yachzer miyad. The Mishnah says a halacha of a person who's not traveling to do a mitzvah. However, if he's on his way to establish a residence for an optional purpose, that means he's traveling before Yom Tov to establish a residence so he could go beyond the tchum of Yom Tov. As we know, a person is usher on Shabbos and Yom Tov to go more than 2,000 amas from his place of residence. This we spoke about. Arichas Masechta Eruvin is called Chum Shabbos. A person's residence is defined as the place where he was when Shabbos began. So it's possible to change one's residence, and thus his tchum before Shabbos by the means of Erev Tchumen. He does this by putting food in a place that's up to 2,000 amas from his actual residence, or by actually being there in the place before Shabbos. Now it's just funny because the Gemara says that the only way a person can make an Erev Tchumen, what's the heter for Erev Tchumen, is only the mitzvah. The Elamai Lishbay Shvisas Harishus doesn't agree to this. So the Rav actually speaks this out. So let's see what the Rav says. He was going to be kind of Shvisa, he has to go back right away to dispose of it. Since his journey is not related to a mitzvah, it's also to rely on Bittul Bi Alma. He must return home to destroy the chametz. However, if he's traveling to establish a residence, so that he'll be able to do a mitzvah on Yom Tov, the halacha is the same as somebody's going directly to do a mitzvah such as Shechting Korban Pesach. Right? So then, even if he's not doing the mitzvah right now, I'll go upon him. If he's going to a Beis Evel or a Beis HaMishta, so Hainu Kahelach L'Shchetes Pischa, it's going to be the same thing as if he's going to Shech Korban Pesach. Mishnah Ches. The previous Mishnah dealt with the question of whether a person who's traveling must return home to destroy his chametz. The Mishnah is going to deal with a similar situation, but one that has nothing to do with chametz. Rather, it involves kachim kalim, which must be eaten in Yerushalayim and anywhere in Yerushalayim. So what's the halacha? So the meat of kachim kalim must be eaten inside Yerushalayim. If it's taken outside the city, it becomes pasul, and one must bring it back to Yerushalayim and burn it there. So Mishnah considers when this chiyuv to bring it back applies and when it does not. Similarly, if someone left Yerushalayim and remembered that he has basar kodesh with him, meaning kachim kalim, the halacha is like this: Im ovar tzayfim, if he already passed tzayfim. What's tzayfim? Tzayfim was the name of a village, and it was the furthest point outside Yerushalayim from where the Beis HaMikdash could be seen. Right? We know in the beginning of Sefer Shmuel, Over there, Rashi says to Pshat, the one was Seifim, that there was a mountain, you're able to see all the way to the other side, and Seifim was also a Lashon of Nevuah. But over there, the Beis HaMikdash wasn't built yet because they were on their way to Mishkan Shilai as a Psukim Mar Mavur over there. So Im Avar Seifim, if you already passed the area called Seifim, could be it was the same area though. Sarfa Bim Kaimeh, he burns it where he is because once he's traveled that far, Chacham didn't trouble him to return all the way to Yerushalayim. But if he didn't pass Seifim yet, Chayzer v'Sarfa l'fnei habira me'atze hamarocha. He must return to Yerushalayim and burn it before the bira with the wood of the marocha, of the mizbeach. What's the bira? So it's a machlokes. Rabbi Yochanan Rish Lakish in Zvachim on Daf Kuf Daled Amud Beis. According to Rabbi Yochanan, bira was a specific place in the Har HaBayis that was designated for the burning of kachim kalim that became possible. And according to Rish Lakish, it refers to the entire area associated with the Beis HaMikdash, including the Har HaBayis. It could be anywhere. So that's the story. Although this Mishnah and the previous one ruled that in certain situations the traveler must return to destroy the chametz or the kachim kalim, he doesn't need to return unless the substance has a certain share. Ad kamahin chayzrin, and for how much chametz or kachim does one have to return? Rameir says in both this case and that case, he only has to go back if he has at least a share of a kebeya. He doesn't need to return unless the chametz or meat is at least as large as an egg. So chametz is smaller than an egg, he can just be mevatel it. If the meat's smaller than an egg, he may burn it where he is. Rabbi Yehuda says in both this case and that case, he returns to Yerushalayim, meaning say in the case of kachim and say in the case of chametz, he returns even for the shir of a kazayis. So chacham aimim sarkedesh bekazayis, chametz bekabeya. In the case of kachim, he has to return for the shir of an olive, and in the case of chametz, the shir is bekabeya. It's just interesting because at the beginning of Masechta Beya, there's a machlekes Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel about what the shir of the Isser Chametz is. Now, even though we're not discussing the exact shir of Chametz right now, we're discussing more the shir of how much you have to go back to, right? But Beis Shammai, this is Masechta Beya, Parak Aleph, Mishnah Aleph. Beis Shammai say, Se'er b'kezayis, so Chametz b'kekaiseves. Beis Hillel zev b'kezayis. Well, Gabi Sreifas Chametz, that you don't have to be mevatel it if you're traveling, so then they were makel in the sense that v'chachamim b'sar kedesh b'kezayis v'chametz b'kebeya. Ad kan.